Personally, I've been contacted by telephone and email by a number of scientists who have serious concerns about aspects of the research that is taking place in various institutions in New Zealand and the increasingly close ties that are developing between science and commerce, but who are convinced that if they express these fears publicly, or even if they ask the awkward and difficult questions, they will be eased out of their institution.
Because of my involvement in the genetic engineering debate, I became very unpopular with the genetic engineers in my department. So I was, let's put it mildly, very strongly encouraged to retire early. Okay, I mean, I was basically hounded out of the department and the university that I had taught in for nearly 25 years.
And a UC Berkeley professor claims that he was being threatened by a senior Mexican government official who tried to get him not to publish incriminating evidence.
He pressured me in a pretty nasty way, threatened and did everything he could to try and convince me that I shouldn't publish.
The vast majority of the academic plant science is funded directly or indirectly from industry. And so that is one of the reasons that, at least I believe, that the academic plant biologists are somewhat hesitant about speaking, taking issue with some of the plant biotechnology, food issues.
This fear among scientists and the control by the biotech industry has meant that there has not been a lot of follow-up to evidence suggesting that genetically modified foods are unsafe, even inside governments. For example, in the Food and Drug Administration, they were approving the very first genetically modified drug. It was a drug injected into cows to increase milk supply. It's called recombinant bovine growth hormone, or RBGH. Scientists complain that this might be unhealthy for humans eating the dairy products and drinking the milk. But those who complained were fired, stripped of responsibilities, or forced out. The remaining whistleblowers had to write an anonymous letter to Congress claiming that there was fraud and conflict of interest in the department. Scientists had been concerned that genes might jump from the genetically modified food to gut bacteria. The biotech industry had claimed that the genes were destroyed during digestion and that no transfer was possible. The only human feeding study, however, contradicted that. It showed that genes that had been inserted into soy actually jumped from the soy and now took up residence inside the DNA of the gut bacteria inside the human beings. So even if we stop eating genetically modified soy, it's possible that the protein that it's engineered to create will continue to be produced inside of us. Organizations like the American Medical Association, the World Health Organization, and others were concerned that the antibiotic-resistant marker genes, which are inserted into genetically modified foods, might jump to our gut bacteria, and that could create new diseases that would be resistant to antibiotics. Also, when you genetically modify something, you have to put in a promoter, something to turn on that foreign gene so it operates 24/7 around the clock. But it turns out that this promoter can turn on other genes at random up and down the DNA. So inside the corn or soy, it might turn on other genes which could be allergenic or toxic or carcinogenic or anti-nutritional. But we now know that that promoter also transfers to gut bacteria. In addition, preliminary evidence showed that the promoter transferred to the organs, the internal organs of rats, after a single meal. Now, earlier we talked about corn that was genetically engineered to produce its own pesticide. Imagine the gene that produces the pesticide transferring to gut bacteria. Now you have a gene inside the DNA, inside our intestines, producing pesticide. It converts our bacteria into living pesticide factories. Tragically, children are most at risk from the potential dangers of genetically engineered foods. They have young, developing bodies, so they're going to be more at risk from possible toxins or nutritional problems. Children are more susceptible to allergies, 3 to 4 times more susceptible than adults, especially children below 2 years old. Also, children drink a lot of milk. Now, the cows injected with genetically engineered bovine growth hormone produce milk with an increased level of a hormone called IGF-1, insulin-like growth factor 1. Those with high levels of IGF-1 in their systems are much more likely to develop breast cancer and prostate cancer. Also, A lot of children have to take antibiotics because of ear infections and other problems. If there are antibiotic-resistant super diseases, that's going to have a tremendous impact on children.
American companies who release these genetically modified foodstuffs have never done proper risk assessment on them. Monsanto said that their genetically modified soya is safe. Then the FDA regarded that as evidence for its safety.
What concerns me is that the health risks of genetically modified organisms in agriculture are only assessed through relatively rudimentary biochemical analysis and short-term feeding trials of animals. And these are totally inadequate.
They feed these animals for only about 4 weeks. Sometimes, on one occasion, I think it was 6 weeks. You can't do cancer experiments in that time. And certainly they were not fed to animals and pregnant animals to see what happened in the offspring. And certainly biochemistry, immunology, tissue pathology, gut function, liver function and kidney function do not seem to be done.
Personally, I have a hard time trusting the 5 or 6 companies in the biotechnology industry which now control our seed supply. I have a hard time trusting them because they are essentially the same companies that brought us pesticides, that told us that pesticides were harmless, that pretended to show spokespeople eating them on television by the spoonful. Of course, it turned out later what they were eating was powdered milk because they weren't stupid enough to actually eat DDT. But these are companies with decades and decades of well-documented lying to the American public.
Many scientists say that industry research is rigged to avoid finding problems.
We need to have good independent safety testing of genetically engineered foods. In other words, safety testing that is not done by the applicant company. I would recommend that perhaps we could set up human clinical trials using volunteers or genetically engineered scientists and their families, because I think they are so convinced of the safety of the products that they are creating that I'm sure they would very readily volunteer to become part of a human clinical trial.
A lot of information today shows that food influences mood and behavior. For example, a study on 3-year-olds showed that 25% of tantrums in the study were due to food coloring and additives added to the juice they were drinking. Also, changes in diet of prisoners and probationers dramatically changed their behavior. A Dutch student took 2 groups of mice. One he fed genetically modified food, the other non-genetically modified food. Those on the natural food played with each other and acted like mice. Those with the genetically modified food stopped playing with each other, sort of retired in their corners and were very non-social. Also, they were very much more scared of him when he went into the cages to pick them up to weigh them, and one was inexplicably found dead at the end of the experiment. Now, does this mean that genetically modified foods will affect behavior of animals or humans? It would certainly be irresponsible to say so based on a single experiment. But by the same token, it would be irresponsible to say that it doesn't, because no studies have actually been done to verify whether in fact there's an influence on behavior. There's a school in Appleton, Wisconsin that changed its diet from the normal daily school meals that kids eat all over the country to wholesome, delicious, and nutritious food, and the change was amazing. They weren't intending to, but when they removed processed foods from the school meals, they removed almost all sources of genetically engineered products. I mention this school in my book, Seeds of Deception, because after about 7 chapters of telling the reader about the dangers of genetically engineered foods and all the rat studies and human problems, I figured someone would still possibly have the excuse, well, I'm going to die anyway. I like sharing the clips of the Appleton documentary as added inspiration for people to change their diet.
The Appleton Area School District in Wisconsin is taking a community-wide approach to school nutrition.
In January of 1997, I visited Central High School as a prospective employee and observed the students that were housed here at the time and found them to be rude, obnoxious, very crude, and ill-mannered.
I was brought over to the school because the school was out of control. They were having a lot of problems with rebellious students, weapons violation, things of that nature. So they wanted a cop on school premise at all times.
We started the food program approximately 3.5 years ago. One Friday, the kids were here. They had candy machines and pop machines in the student lounge. The following Monday, they came to school and they were greeted by water coolers and healthy bagels.